following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
So we call to order this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. First order of business is the adoption of our agenda. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Mr. Fisher, any seconds?
Second.
And we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Our motion is adopted. Thank you very much. The next order of business is the approval of our October 20th minutes. Are there any changes, suggested edits, amendments, anything of that nature to the minutes? If not, I'll hear a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Mr. Rogers moves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Randolph. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. That passes unanimously as well. We'll now move on to our public hearings for this evening. And before we begin that, we have a set of guidelines I'd like to pass along to you out there, and then we'll begin our public hearings. First of all, the staff will introduce the proposal at the podium, and they will speak on the podium to your right, which is to our left. And at that point then, after they're done with their presentation, I will open the public hearing. First person we'll hear from will be the applicant, who will have 10 minutes to speak, and the applicant will speak at the podium to your left, there, and that's to our right as well. And after the applicant, we will then allow one person at a time come down here and speak. And if you do, please provide a comment card to the clerk, and please speak at the podium closest to the clerk, which would be the one on your left. Excuse me. After that, you're going to have 5 minutes to speak. You'll see a little light set up on that podium there. You'll have a green light for 4.5 minutes. You'll have a yellow light for the final 30 seconds of your time to speak. And then finally, when that light flashes red, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up and we can move on to the next person in the name of fairness. So I would like the speakers, if you can, please follow the following rules. Be concise. 5 minutes goes by quite quickly. Avoid repetition. If you happen to have a large group, which I don't see tonight, but if you happen to have a large group, please appoint one spokesperson for that. Direct all your comments to the board at large, not to any individual, and you can go any way you like back to your seat. The reason you direct your comments to the entire board is we will not be interacting with you. We will listen to what you say. It's our chance to hear what you have to say. We'll then close the public hearing when everyone is done speaking, and then we will have questions perhaps for the applicant or for the staff, and we will discuss the issue ourselves. Did I miss anything? If not, we will begin with our first case for the public hearing. Ms. Bierman, REZ 14, REZ 05.
Thank you and good evening. This is a request to rezone 16.41 acres at 2421 High House Road. This is a vicinity map. You can see the property in relation to High House Road, and this is NC 55 highway. It's about 300 feet east of NC 55. To the west, or to the east in this area, this is the Wellesley subdivision, and then Park Arbor and Park Canyon subdivisions, which are a part of the West Park Plan Development District, or to the south. And this is to the to the west and south is the commercial portion of the park, or the West Park Shopping Center. And this is just a closer aerial view. You can see the site, the shopping center, the surrounding subdivisions, and there is an existing residence located on the property that you can see. This is the G.H. Bauckham House. This is historic residence that is on the Cary-Wake County Historic Inventory. And one of the zoning conditions included with this request would be to preserve the house in its current location. The land use plan for this site calls for low-density residential use, which allows up to 3 units per acre. But also point out that this property was the subject of a recent land use plan amendment that was approved in July of this year that changed the plan designation from medium-density and low-density residential to, or medium and high-density residential to low-density residential. The existing zoning is residential 40. This is also in a mixed-use overlay district for West Park. As part of the rezoning request, the zoning for the site is proposed to be changed from R8 conditional use, and the mixed-use overlay district would be removed. There are a number of proposed zoning conditions. The column that you see on the right here are the existing conditions as they're currently proposed. When this was initially submitted for a public hearing in May of 2014, there were a different set of conditions and actually a different zoning district, so this represents the changes that have been made since the initial public hearing. Currently, the request is for R8 conditional use. When this first went to public hearing, it was proposed as transitional residential conditional use. The maximum density proposed is now 2.5 dwelling units per acre. Initially, this was 3.0 units per acre. There's also a 30-foot undisturbed buffer around the perimeter of the property adjacent to the residential developments. The land development ordinance requires a 20-foot type B semi-opaque buffer. So this is a new condition that has been added since the initial proposal. The minimum lot size would be 8,000 square feet per the residential 8 district, except along the perimeter adjacent to the existing residential subdivisions. Adjacent to the perimeter, those lots would be 11,000 square feet. And also, there was a change to the zoning condition related to the preservation of the existing structure. The original condition just stated generally that it would be saved in the area. The applicant has looked into that more closely and is now prepared to commit to save the residence in its current location with the preservation easement. There are some stream buffers shown on the site according to Cary's GIS maps. These are features that would be field determined at the time of the site or subdivision plan review. There are no park or greenway facilities directly impacted by the site. The closest is an existing street side trail on NC 55 highway. According to Cary's transportation plan, High House Road is designated as a major thoroughfare. And there is a C-Tran fixed route route along High House Road. With regard to citizen and council feedback from the public hearing, there were no protest petitions submitted. At the public hearing, 2 area residents did express support for the request. In terms of the council comments, there were some comments and concerns regarding the potential for mass grading, which is a general comment related to the potential grading as that can occur with the transitional residential densities. There was also a desire for larger perimeter buffers. There was a comment regarding inclusion of amenities for children, and also questions regarding details related to preservation of the historic home on the property. So as I discussed the zoning conditions that are proposed at this time, there were a couple of the conditions that have been included are now in response to some of those comments. That concludes staff's comments. Following the applicant's comments in the public hearing will be available for questions.
Thank you.
I mean, the applicant's, did I say the applicant's comments? That's what I meant.
We'll now hear from the applicant.
Good evening. I'm J.W. Sharon with IDS in Cary, the planning consultant for this project. In February of this year, we had a homeowners meeting for all the adjacent owners within the area. We had 42 show up, and the meeting was very enlightening to a lot of those owners because the land use plan at the time had designated this site for medium density to high density, which puts you in the range of anywhere from 8 to 12 units an acre. So they were pleasantly surprised that we are coming in with a low-density residential that was supported by the council, and so now we're working with an LDR case. Originally, we had it TRCU. We felt that that would be a good transition from lots, fronting High House Road, but after further consideration and evaluation with the historic home, we met with, that was our key over the last few months, is to try to figure out what's the best thing to do with the house to make sure that it stays there. It's most important to this family, too, that that home stays there. So what we did, we met with Capital Area Preservation. We met with him, too, to determine if the home stays in its location, what would be the appropriate land area to be supported around the house where they would feel that the property would continue to have a historic designation, even on a national register. So we ended up with the area of 2/3 of an acre. The home would stay as where it's located. It's in a great shape. I mean, the property was lived in until, it became an estate property. The property owner is intending to donate the house to the Preservation Society to be sold with someone with the covenants to further protect it and be used as a residential structure. With the perimeter buffers, we really never had any adjacent property owners request any additional buffers, but just for the sake of it being naturally wooded in that area, there's no desire by this family to cut trees and that, so we just upped it to 30 feet. You may be aware, too, on the West Park side, it does have a 20-foot buffer, but they are allotted buffers, so we're providing a 30-foot unlotted, and we're putting perimeter lot sizes at 11,000 square feet. With that said, if you look at the adjacent properties there, too, with those lotted buffers, they may be 11 or 12,000, but our minimum lot width is 60 feet in the R8 district. So if you take 60 times 30, that's another 1,800 feet behind the lot, and then we're still putting, 11,000 square foot lot minimum. Also, too, with the conditions relating to the density, there was nothing specifically requested by anyone to do that, but, just after a further evaluation on the north side, we kept it at 2.5. We are not trying to load the site. We're just trying to develop it in a low-density nature, so I matched the densities at 2.5. We also looked at, the tree survey on the site as it relates to the mass grading because of Cary's tree ordinance and the house being left where it is. There's not going to be a lot of opportunity to mass grade a site. So it's just the way it's laid out. It's going to be what I think a fantastic location for a nice tucked-in subdivision and saving a historic resource, which I think is probably the best house in Cary from any that I've seen historically to be saved. With that said, we feel like we have, supported the neighbors. They supported us. It's a good project for West Cary, and we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak to the public hearing? If so, please indicate that you would. If not, I will close the public hearing, and we will now have our chance for discussion. Yes.
So I came in onto the board after the LDO was changed for this. So one of my concerns, there's a lot to like about this, but the traffic. And not so much that this is going to add traffic or, reduce the traffic that we might have had, but I passed through this intersection. In fact, I came this way tonight. Traffic is backed up back to the middle of this site from that light. And that was after a left turn light had let quite a few cars go. So I can see where traffic will be backed almost all the way across the site. People aren't going to be able to get in and out. So, I realize with the low number of units that there was no need for a traffic study, but, something's just basically wrong here. And I don't know what the solution is, but, I'm interested in the parcel across the street. Is this the same applicant? And if those had been combined, would there have been a traffic study or more requirements?
If the two had been combined, there would have been a traffic study required. Neither project on its own generated or the traffic to meet the threshold for a traffic study. The applicant, that was the same applicant for each project in terms of the representative for the property owners. However, there were several different property owners. The property on the north side, there were about 8 or 9 different property owners involved as air property. This parcel on the south side, there was one parcel, and there was I think the fact that the house was there was a consideration from the timing standpoint, because it took quite a bit of time to resolve that issue. There was no requirement that they be put together as a single project or as a single development. There's not a specific developer that was the applicant, so they really functioned separately, and they were taken forward separately.
And I realize that this traffic issue isn't of their making, but the people who live there are not going to be able to come left out of that subdivision. And so what they're going to have to do is they're going to turn right, and they're going to make a U-turn, and it's going to be chaos. So, I'm kind of at a loss of what to do. I mean, dual left turn lanes onto 55, are really needed. Have the other developments around there put money into money aside? I guess they had to contribute for road improvements, or did they make all the road improvements that were needed at the time?
The road improvements that are required from the comprehensive transportation plan are made along the frontage of any properties being developed. If the complete section isn't built out, everyone builds their half of the road. In terms of, since there wasn't a specific traffic study done, there's no other off-site improvements that are required. But at the time of the subdivision or the subdivision plan that comes through, in terms of the access points and looking at how the traffic functions, there's work that's done with the town, DOT, and the applicant to look to how to, how to deal with those transitions and how to have the traffic flow best. There are a number of, there are options that can be looked at where the, how access points would line up, whether or not there's a median break, how that would be designed, potentials for leftover type design to get in and out of development. So there's a number of different options for how that access can occur, keeping in mind how the traffic flows, in the context of the existing roadway and traffic volumes that are looked at the time of the subdivision plan.
Does the town have any improvements planned for that intersection?
I'm not aware of any. I would have to refer to our transportation staff.
Because, that intersection during rush hour is hazardous coming from that direction.
Good evening. Which particular intersection are you referring to?
The intersection at 55 and High House, coming from the direction of this site.
The town does
Turning
not.
left.
The town does not have any improvement project planned at this particular intersection, nor does NCDOT. I do know that as part of the H7 High School that's occurring down on Roberts Road, they're going to be adding a right turn lane going westbound on High House Road, so that certainly should eliminate some of that backup through there. But the left turn there is quite heavy.
I have equal concerns with the traffic. Also, the intersection of Cranbourne and High House there, you have people coming west on High House doing a U-turn because you can't, because of that Jenks Carpenter situation. So they're going U-turn, and you're going to have these people coming out of their neighborhood, coming down and doing a U-turn. And even if there was a traffic study done, my concern is not the peak hours that most people think of. It's going to be the 2:15 to 3 o'clock when the kids are getting out of school, and you've got a bunch of young drivers all doing U-turns at each other, and you still have Berkeley coming out doing a left-hand turn into there. So my concern is also on the Cranbourne, High House, and that intersection in there.
You know, and to make this even worse, there's no connectivity to any of these subdivisions. I don't know how we manage this. These are not really old subdivisions. There's, you know, they have cul-de-sacs everywhere, and there's no alternative but to go out on High House. So, anyway, that's pretty much the only issue. I mean, the other changes are great. It's you know, I appreciate the efforts.
I had another question.
Yes,
About the pedestrian traffic, the fact that these people will be hopefully walking, we want walkability. If they're going east on High House, when they cross over Whittington, there's no markings right there, and as it is, the neighborhood there is already expressed in their last homeowners association. They feel like they're almost walking out onto High House. So if you're coming down east on High House, everybody's doing 45 there. You've got to do a really fast right-hand turn, and the residents that are already there are concerned that they're going to get hit, the safety factor there. So if you add more residents down the road that are hopefully walking there, you're going to have more pedestrian and bicycle traffic there. So again, that whole pedestrian and car traffic, not so much the, I'm worried about the safety of all of it for the.
Any other comments? Questions? I have a few, if I may. The first thing goes back to Ms. Stedler, what you said about the combining the two. If I'm not mistaken, REZ 04 and 5 were the north and south portions here, and they were presented to town council at the same time, correct? But as independent zonings.
The land use plan amendment was presented together for those two because there's not a traffic study requirement related to the comprehensive land use plan change. But, so the plan amendment was presented together. The rezonings were presented at the same meeting and at the same time with that, just for ease of understanding. The comprehensive plan amendment for both pieces tracked as one project together because that was a more broad issue being looked at. And then the rezonings branched off and went on their own timelines following the comprehensive plan amendment.
Any other questions at all?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
one more. Also, if there was, heaven forbid, an emergency situation and the fire trucks had to come from, I guess, the closest firehouse down west on High House, would they be doing a U-turn in the middle of the High House and 55 intersection? And don't know how that would be. When is that addressed, those type of?
Whether or not there would be a right-in, right-out, or a leftover type design, or, you know, some provision to have a medium break to go through hasn't been determined at this time. That's a issue at the site plan stage. That being said, once that configuration, you know, is made, then in terms of routing the fire trucks, they would be looking at, you know, they would have a mechanism to look for the best ways to get to the site that would take that into account.
So that's my site plan?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I have one last question, and that is the Bockham House. Is there going to be some sort of a buffer between that and the development, or I know there's not one required, but what kind of transition do we have there?
There's no requirement for any transition. The zoning conditions that are presented would ensure that the house is preserved in its location. If there are any details of that nature that would need to be done in order to ensure that the preservation easement from the folks who deal with the preservation aspect of it, if there was something that was required in order to achieve that step, then that would need to be done, but there's not a zoning condition that relates specifically to any kind of buffering between the uses. It's integrated more into the development as a lot.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? If not, I'd be willing to hear a motion in one way or the other.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 14REZ05 to the Town Council with recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation. I share some of the concerns about traffic, as we have in almost a large majority of the issues that we have to take up with this board, and ultimately some of the safety issues related to that. But I don't see that that's anything we're going to immediately be able to address with this piece of property, and hopefully as the transportation plan for this area continues to be developed, something can be done with that intersection that would enhance that overall traffic flow. Having said that, I see this project as one that's been put together with a lot of thought. The low density, I think, is great here. Transition from the R40 to the R8 conditional use provides a good transition there. The work done to maintain and retain the historical site, certainly my compliments to the developer for that. I see that as a very positive thing. Having said that, this plan is presented here, I see as a good fit for the surrounding area, and I think it's a good use for this space.
So there's a motion out there. Do we have a second anywhere?
I will second.
All right, now we're in discussion, but that's all well and good.
I agree. I'm really thrilled about they're saving the historic house, and that it's also like residential use with the density matching the surrounding area, the buffers. I think it's all fabulous. I know the neighbors are thrilled. I just have this overriding headache worrying about those U-turns and that safety factor that just would keep me up nights if I said it was wonderful, 100%. So.
And I second the motion primarily because I like the property. I think traffic is an issue. We know that. But again, it's something that we can't address here. I think that the town of Cary is diligent in trying to come up with the best solution that's possible, and so I applaud that. As far as the applicant, I love the lower density, the fact that they're saving the house. They've addressed the fact that they're not going to mass grade. I just think it's a great property for that area, and I compliment the staff and the developer.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
So I'm going to vote against the motion simply because, due to the severity of the traffic here and the fact that both of those parcels went through the same land use planning process, makes me a little uneasy about the fact that the rezonings went through, and I'm sure it was for many reasons and not to, get away with not doing a traffic study, but at the same time, one was really needed here. And, the traffic study is a part of the rezoning, and conditions that they would, offer are part of the rezoning. So I know at site plan, they can say, this access will be right in, right out, it will be here, it will be across. I'm not getting into that because I'm no traffic engineer, but I do want to bring this to council's attention. And if I'm sure this is fine and it will pass, but this is a situation that they need to address somehow for future developments.
Any other discussion? Well, then, would all in favor of approval please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
We have a 6-2. All right, our next case coming up is 14 REZ 22. Ms. Grandin.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a request to rezone approximately 11.35 acres located at Evans Road and Weston Parkway. Subject property is shown here, highlighted in yellow on the south side of Weston Parkway and to the east of Evans Road. A zoomed-in aerial view shows that the subject property is currently vacant. The land use plan designation for the property is office and institutional. The existing zoning is PDD major. This is part of the Weston PDD. And this red circle shows you where the subject property sits in relationship to the overall Weston PUD. The property has an office and institutional designation with a commercial overlay. So in addition to office uses, it also has the opportunity currently to be used for a number of commercial uses such as restaurant, retail. The applicant has proposed a preliminary development plan for residential use. An overview of the plan states that it would allow residential use of up to 325 attached residential units on 11.35 acres and provide a neighborhood recreation amenity, have a maximum building height of 70 feet, and parking spaces at 1 space per bedroom. So this is what was presented with the initial preliminary development plan that was presented to Town Council. This is the plan that was presented to Town Council showing the location of the perimeter buffers, streetscape buffers, and the general location of the buildings and the parking area on the subject property. There's proposed to be parking surrounding the building in the center and a parking deck. So a number of opportunities to reduce parking impacts with the design, as well as a reduction to LDO parking standards. At the time this was first presented, it was approximately a 36% reduction to LDO parking standards. Property owners within 800 feet of the subject property were notified of the rezoning request. There were no protest petitions. Staff had received a number of inquiries from citizens regarding traffic in the vicinity of the site. There were questions about the pedestrian network in the overall Weston PDD. And there was one neighbor who expressed the desire to maintain commercial uses within walking distance of the existing residential in the Weston PDD. The Town Council did not have major concerns with the request, but there was some discussion about balancing the need for the urban-style housing in the area and preserving land that's currently zoned for office use. The applicant spoke at the public hearing and is here again tonight talking about the balance and the mix of uses in the Weston PDD. Over the years, there have been a number of rezoning cases that have seen a conversion from office use to residential. And those are highlighted here. The areas in yellow show the zoning case and what the current designation is now, either high density or medium density residential. Staff looked at some of the figures that the applicant has presented, and those are attached to your staff reports, and provided some additional information that you can see here. And it shows you the area in green is currently vacant property, and that's where the subject property is located here at the corner. The blue area is existing non-residential that's already been developed for either an office or a non-residential use. The tan or beige colored area is existing residential. And then we have a number of projects here in the pipeline. The purple is non-residential. This is the MetLife project right here. And then there's additional vacant or property that's in the pipeline for development for office use over here off of Center Green. And then there's some park and open space land shown here in the light green. So you do see that there is a true mix of uses in the PDD. There is demand for urban-style housing in the area, and it's really a question of just what the board feels is appropriate for the Weston Plan Development District. The applicant also responded to a number of comments from staff and submitted a revised plan development that showed a 10-foot average buffer adjacent to the office use to the east. And in addition to this, the applicant has proposed to do a sidewalk along Weston Parkway. There was a lot of concern about pedestrian connectivity on the site. So the current plan now has, in addition to the sidewalk that's already existing on Evans Road and the private greenway trail that's already built on the subject property, sidewalk has been proposed along Weston Parkway. Transit stop has been proposed on Weston Parkway. A 5% increase in the number of parking spaces has been proposed for the site. And there was a question as to whether or not there was some guarantee about the limited number of one-bedroom units, and there is. The PDD document does specify that there will be a minimum of 60% of the dwellings would have one bedroom, minimum of 32% would have 2 bedrooms, and there would be a maximum of 8% of the dwelling units that would have 3 bedrooms. So there's a number of factors that go into the PDD that help to justify the reduction to the LDO standards for parking. And staff has observed that other similar projects like this, we have not received complaints about the parking, so staff did not see an objection to this. The site is impacted by a stream buffer according to Cary's GIS maps that's shown here in blue. There is a greenway trail system in close proximity to the subject property, a proposed street-side trail shown here in blue. As I mentioned earlier, there is a private trail system that runs along the southern portion of the subject property. Cary's transportation plan identifies Weston Parkway and Evans Road as major thoroughfares. And there is a proposed C-Tran route along Weston Parkway. This concludes staff's presentation, and following the applicant's comments, I'll be available for your questions.
Thank you. We'll open the public hearing and first begin with the applicant.
Hello, my name is Chuck Smith, representing Highwoods Properties and Woodfield Development in this matter. Deborah said a number of things that I was going to address, so I'll try to keep it to some of the issues that came up at planning at the public hearing that we last had and some of the changes that we've made. I feel like I should be addressing the question at the beginning of this, since this has been a notion that you've heard around town in recent years. Do we have too many apartments in Cary? Just as a general question before getting into this site. Planning department has been keeping up with the ratio of single family to multifamily over the last 40 years. And that ratio has changed very little since 1980 or so, when our growth really began. And it's been approximately 75%, 76% single family, 24 to 25% multifamily. It was that way in 1980, 1990, and it's that way today. So I could say in general that I don't think we've got too many. I would also say, if you're keeping up with what's been going on with Imagine Cary and that process, we are behind the curve in providing housing for millennials and for our aging population. They aren't looking to live in single-family homes. They're looking for more of a product type like this. So I feel like when you look at those things, that we are providing and meeting a need that is in town today, and will be even more so in the future. I think the better question, though, is the use that we propose appropriate at this specific location at Weston and Evans? And let me, again, for some of the newer members, Ms. Sadler, I don't really consider you a newer member, because you probably were around for a lot of these things that we did a number of years ago. But Deborah, or Ms. Grannon, did mention that council had, the planning board and council approved the location of a mixed-use district on top of this site in this intersection. And what that does is expand the ability to, for office and to providing retail and high-density residential uses. And then secondly, as part of that, both Planning Board and Council have approved guidelines that help us go through the process of figuring out how to meet the needs then and balancing land uses at that type of mixed-use intersection. And these standards will help you, specifically in this case, zero in on the appropriate number of higher density residential units. And so when you look at the guidelines, when we apply them conservatively to this case, we should have a minimum of 296 units and a maximum of 1,182 units, so somewhere in that range. And I've got the specifics. I think you've got some of the things that gets into, if I understand the information you've been given, that gets into the fact that the amount of square footage that MetLife is putting in, that Center Green is expanding, and all those things that are just right around the site and in the future within the activity center. So again, in conclusion, I think it's not only appropriate in this location, but I think it's necessary that we provide housing in this location to meet the requirements for the mixed-use District 1. But it's also vital. The other part of this is not only we need to make sure that the office owners that we have here and their employees, we have a healthy mix of uses for them. Again, in the Imagine Cary process, I mean, many of the older office parks are converting to more of a mixed-use play sort of environment, and so we're trying to get residents as close to employment as we can, so there's so that we're resulting in less driving, really, and more biking and walking. So then, as you get more specific into the details, we've had 2 neighborhood meetings. I think the staff report says 1. We've had 2. Really have had no objections during those meetings, but we've had questions. Some of those were brought up in the presentation Ms. Grannon just gave, but I don't think schools were mentioned, and we always get that question when you're providing housing and the impact of our schools. We have, some of the conditions that you saw, and really the most important one is the 60% guarantee of 1-bedroom units. It's really trying to get at a young professional tenant as opposed to families. So that doesn't mean there won't be any. We've been tracking over the last 10 years or so as we've been providing this type of housing in the Weston area, but also some other areas around town, this more urban type of apartment. Fairly consistently, there's been about 15 to 20 school-age kids for these apartment projects that are in the 250 to 350 unit size. So I think the conditions that we are putting on there are working. I'm not going to go into all of them. I think they were in some of the other information you may have had, but it is trying to get at more of a young professional than it is a family. I know you'll ask about traffic. Will there be an increase in traffic? By the fact that we have an office use approved there, and really one of the big reasons that we began this transition in Weston a number of years ago, trying to get more residential in there, is because it was a train wreck coming from a traffic standpoint. And we wanted to, and what this does, what's been happening is more of a balancing of traffic with people leaving the development at the same time others are coming in during peak hours. So we think that's a better traffic situation. But it's also resulted in more of our workers living near the places they work. And so there's been more biking and walking to work than there has. And some of the recent studies we've done, Weston Lakeside is an existing apartment project in there. A few years ago, we did a study that showed 70% of the people living there were working in the Weston and Sass area. So we feel like the conditions that are being proposed and have been working in that regard. Some miscellaneous issues that, again, Ms. Grannon talked about a few of these. Pedestrian connectivity is an important one here because we are proposing a residential use, we feel like. Makes it a little different than if it was, again, going to be office or retail. So we have provided the sidewalk along Weston Parkway. It's if you've been around and heard the difficulty, because at the beginning of Weston, No sidewalks were proposed on Weston Parkway. Lights went there, street trees went there. It's tough to go back and retrofit that. We're going to do that here because we feel like there is going to be a fairly significant migration back and forth between the Center Green MetLife area and our project site. So we are working towards providing that amenity. You heard about parking. We want to underpark our project less than the town wants us to provide parking. We've gone through a number, again, we've provided these same sorts of parking standards to these other projects that we've done in Weston and similar situations, and they meet the need. We provided the extra 5% just to help people understand or take care of what they perceive to be an issue for guests and that sort of thing coming into the project. But we know that the need has been met. Transit stop is important, particularly as we go through time here. There is a proposed line there, and we are providing the stop in front of our site. The question about office inventory, we've still got in Weston, I can't speak for the rest of Cary, in Weston we've got about 10 more years of inventory of office if you follow a normal absorption rate. You know, with what's happened with MetLife recently, that isn't a normal absorption rate. There was a lot of office that went down pretty quickly, and that has really spurred a lot of what has happened here, including this request. And we do need to try to get residential near that use. And then finally, why aren't we providing retail? Those corners have been set up for retail for a number of years, and we've tried to get retail there. The pretty consistent answer is we want to see more rooftops in that area before we will locate there. So we're hoping that by doing this, this will also spur some retail development on the other corners that does not exist right now. So that's about all I've got. If you've got any questions, I'm available for those. Thank you.
Would anyone care to speak at the public hearing for this case? I see no one rising, so I will close the public hearing and we will begin our discussion. Anyone?
So I have one question, and it is related to traffic, but I noticed there was one roadway improvement that has not been offered by the applicant. And I kind of remember a few years back, you know, it was kind of you know, we identify things that you do and you do them, or, you know, you were asking for some kind of special exemption. But it doesn't seem that way in the recent reports that I've read. So, you know, as far as this one improvement that hasn't been offered, does staff see that as a big issue?
Well, I'm not sure staff has an opinion on it, other than it's reflected in the report as a deficiency in the transportation network. Some of you may or may not know that in early 2013, we repealed our adequate public facilities ordinance, which with rezoning cases or site plans, if it showed up in the report, it basically was a mitigation that they had to do. With the repeal of that ordinance now, it's more of the traffic studies identify deficiencies in our network, and then these are certainly things that you consider during your deliberations to approve it. The applicant has opportunities to offer conditions in their rezoning case to reflect certain improvements that they are willing to do to mitigate the impact they have on the infrastructure. But certainly everything in the report is something that you should consider as you evaluate this case. They do have one improvement at the intersection of Aviation Parkway and Evans Road, which is basically, I think the majority of that is in Morrisville, but that does show it a deficiency. And certainly that's if you have questions to the applicant as to why they couldn't consider that improvement, that certainly would be something appropriate you could ask them.
Is that a signalized intersection?
That is a signalized intersection, yes.
Okay. I don't travel that area very often, so I'm not.
It's a very heavily traveled intersection, particularly those going to the park every day, but also you have a huge influx of people coming to the Weston development for work as well.
got a question for Mr. Jensen. Are we adding a lane to the Evans Road part of the intersection in front of this site?
They are adding a third lane
Right-hand turn.
for a right-hand turn lane. Our long-range plans calls for Evans Road to be a 6-lane median divided roadway in this section of roadway, but that outside lane right now will be used as a right turn lane for the intersection, as well as a short right turn lane going into the development as well.
Does Cary's boundary go up to aviation, or does it stop somewhere in between?
I believe it goes up to aviation, but then on the other side of that, I believe it's in Morrisville, I believe. I don't know if we have a map, but I believe I remember something of that nature. Once you get to that borderline, it does get a little bit fuzzy.
I also have a question for Mr. Smith.
You can actually see that.
There's a map right there.
Yeah. So the area in green is Cary's zoning, and then where the area is in white here, this is Morrisville.
Okay, thank you.
Now, let me just say, too, that's why we did not offer the improvement. It's in the town of Morrisville. We're not improving their intersections. We're improving
Right.
Cary's.
Yeah. I thought you did an excellent job in a presentation on just hitting a lot of items that are of concern. But I'm sort of curious about this 10, I believe you said 10 years of inventory of office. From what I get, the demand for office space right now is really behind the curve, in the sense that there's more inventory than there really is demand, and that the occupancy rate is around 17% or higher. Would you agree with my sort of gut feeling? Or?
There's certainly people in here that can answer this better than I can, but the one way I would distinguish that is Class A office space is different from a lot of the office space that you're talking about. Weston, the office in Weston is really Class A office space, and it's a totally different conversation, and we're probably the question is, are we running out of that sort of, and where can we provide other areas that meet that need, because that is a different need. But yes, across the board in lesser quality, and that doesn't mean that it's not important, but a MetLife, for example, is not going to be going to that kind of office space. It's going to be coming to this sort of area that we're talking about here. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
I think you can answer this one for me. I was a little confused by our staff report in where we were comparing the PDD amendment proposed by the applicant to the existing PDD land use. And there was a comment in there, single building proposed. This isn't a single building, is it?
No, sir.
We've got three separate.
It's three separate buildings with one of them wrapping a parking deck in the middle of the central one.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Smith, while you're there, quick question. As I read through the staff report here, it indicates that, or at least as I read this, we're looking at essentially a 3-year build-out. Is that correct?
Of our project?
Yes.
That is correct, but it's not as easily answered as just saying 3 years. I mean, the intent is to get a building open and people moving in, and then beginning the building on the far side of the site, I believe, so that you don't have all 300 units coming on at one time. You try to stage that a little bit, but it's not something that's staged over many years. It's because we have the need. Frankly, I think you probably should be, why are you not asking for more units when you look at the numbers and the need that's out there? But this is about all the site can stand, and then it's just a matter of normal building practice and proper absorption of those units so that they're not all coming on at the same time.
So it will be phased.
Well,
to some degree.
construction I don't think will ever stop.
Yeah.
But it's not begin all 300 at one time and they finish all at the same time.
Understand. Okay.
I don't know if that confuses things or helps.
No, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I've got one other question, Mr. Chair,
By all means.
for staff. Concerning pedestrian circulation, the statement's made that the PDP proposes a connection to the private greenway. What is the mechanism to make that work?
They'll put sidewalk in, the
Yeah,
private sidewalk.
But from a
I'll sh-
contractual or a legal standpoint,
It's actually, when you have a preliminary development plan with this level of detail on it, showing connection points, we will expect to see that on the site plan, on the development plan when it comes in. Just as though, by the same token, we'll expect to see the building situated as shown on the plan. There'll be some room for minor variation, but the pedestrian network, they're obligated by what they've put on this development plan.
okay, so this effectively locks that.
Correct.
connection.
Yeah, you can see the sidewalk network in here coming down and providing connection to the private greenway trail.
Okay. Good, thank you.
I have a question. On the private greenway, just for clarification, that's just built and maintained by
Weston,
Weston? Okay,
correct. That's existing today.
thank you.
Any other questions? I have one concerning Weston Parkway Site Access Number 2. Would you walk me through that timeline a little bit of how?
This is regarding the traffic mitigation.
Traffic mitigation, yes.
Going to ask Mr. Jensen to speak to
Oh,
that.
by all means.
Weston Parkway site access.
Okay, so I'll try to, if I get too technical, please stop me, and I'll try to back up a little bit. But currently, right now, there's a median opening there, and across the street, there's also another access way to a major office building there. Currently, right now, the intersection is unsignalized, so there's no signal there. It doesn't currently meet warrants for a traffic signal to be installed at that location. When they add this particular building, the traffic study indicated that a traffic signal at this particular location would help mitigate any traffic congestion that may occur. So the report basically indicates that there could be a possibility for a need for a signal to help solve the congestion issue. The next step in that is once the project is built, they'll need to determine if there are enough signal warrants met that would justify putting a signal here. Just because during the peak hour there may be some congestion, there are other factors that we use to determine whether a signal actually gets installed. So the process would be is once the building is up and going, well, first of all, excuse me, let me back up. They would basically do a signal warrant study to see if one would be required or could be substantiated. If one is not readily available, they'll make a payment securing funds to the town for a signal, and then once the project is entirely built out and a period of time passes, they'll do another signal warrant study to see if traffic truly was realized, that they met enough signal warrants to justify a signal. If it does justify it, they will have to put the signal in. If one is not at that particular time after build out, then the money would be returned back to the applicant and no signal will be put at that location. So basically the rule is we just don't put unwarranted signals at locations unless they truly are needed and are justifiable. And I think our legal staff may want to expand on that a little bit.
Well, we're actually, and this may be news to Mr. Smith, so sorry to hear it for the first time, but we're going to ask them to rewrite this condition a little bit because it's a little bit confusing. I think the timing of when all these things happen. So when this goes back to council, I expect this will probably be worded a little bit differently so that timing is more clear.
And that was my big question, was the timing, but the way you laid it out, after build-out, the final decision on warrants will be made. And
Right, at build out, then you'll really know exactly did the amount of traffic that was forecasted really come to fruition.
And I want to just be clear on one thing. Was it suggested earlier that a high-density residential compilation such as this has a lower traffic impact than were this office space?
I think that was a comment made by Mr. Smith. Now the question is I could probably say in generalities, if there was a significant amount of office that did go on this corner, it could have a higher trip generation potential than this project. But Again, unless I have something to compare that against, it's very difficult to say. But I would say in most cases, office has has probably a little bit higher generation rate than you would apartments. A little bit difficult to say, though.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, would anyone care to make a motion one way or the other?
I have a motion. I move that the board forward case number 14 REZ 22 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Thank you. And do I have a second? Sure.
I'll second.
I think you beat him to it.
That's fine.
Discussion, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My reason for approval of this is that, as the applicant did a great job of doing, is identifying that this is a really good site for this kind of development. I think the urban style in this area really complements what we already have for office and institutional. And I think that, of course, traffic's always an issue, but this area really will allow people to, your pedestrian and bike traffic to kind of take precedence over your regular vehicular traffic. So I think it is a great use.
Thank you.
I thought it was very well thought out, and like you said, they presented all the issues up front and dealt with all of them already.
Yeah. I think it's a good use. I did work in Weston for quite a while, and I really like the use for this site. I kind of hesitated on the parking, but, these guys are in the business of building these buildings, and they're familiar with what parking is required, and if it's inadequate, then the building management will have to address that somehow. I mean, there's vacant land next door, if they want to do something about it. Yeah, I like it. I'll vote for it.
Any other discussion? Yes.
Yeah, I like the plan as well. I think the applicant did a good job of not only laying it out, but then looking forward to, if it's going to be mixed use, to kind of spur the economic use there with retail and other resources that are excuse me, that will come into the district, that by building this type of development that may spur on those other uses.
Yeah,
So-
that's a good point. I like that.
Any other discussion? Well, if not, I'll throw my 2 cents in here. I really like both these cases tonight because they highlight some of the overarching things we're going to be looking at going forward. We talked about traffic earlier, and when this went before council, there was some mention of how Raleigh and Charlotte are going to be some of the fastest growing office space areas in the country in the near future. So the idea that we could be behind the curve in providing office is real, but at the same time, the young urban professional residential is also a big need. I'm struck by something that Mr. Smith said, and that is that we also have to think about the millennials, and clearly this is aimed more at urban professionals, but as we go forward, we're going to have to talk about some higher density sites for millennials that may not be traditionally where we think about those being. So I think it's going to be interesting going forward, and I agree this is a really good first step and very well thought out. So that's my 2 cents as well. And anyone else before we call a vote? And if not,
Well, I'll surf on your wave, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
be my guest.
This is, from a philosophical standpoint, you're right. There have been several issues that these two cases are representative of, one of which I think is this whole issue of, do you stop doing things because you don't have adequate public facilities for something, be it roads, schools, et cetera? And I think all you have to do is go out on the internet and do a search as to what type of result occurred when a city put a moratorium on growth to wait around for public facilities to catch up with the growth. And it was pretty much getting your knee capped by a baseball bat. So even though I think nobody likes traffic, Cary to me, after living in Los Angeles for 15 years, seems like nothing. But anyway, you know, I can look at my own street, and I have a 6-lane street running perpendicular to the entrance to my development. And one of those lanes gets filled up with traffic all the way back to a prior intersection. And 3 of those lanes sit there virtually unoccupied. So just because you build something doesn't necessarily mean that all the people that are out there driving around are going to use it in the most intelligent fashion. When we get back to the issue of how does this fit in Weston, I agree with most of the comments we've already heard. That I think that for a millennial type, or even for somebody like my wife and I, who are just recently retired, we've been taking care of 2/3 of an acre for 15 years. We're getting a little tired of doing that. Places like this offer an opportunity to be in the middle of something. And of course, Highwoods always builds a nice product anyway. I think on the school issue and the parking space issue, again, and this is something the board has had discussions about previously when we were looking at multifamily sites. We've kind of heard from staff, and the board has pretty much agreed that our original parking requirements were maybe a little too stingy. We were asking for more than was necessary. And as you've indicated, a smart builder is not going to build a product and then hurt it by having inadequate parking. So they look at what happens in past projects, and I think they've got a pretty good handle on what they need to do here. So again, this is one of these projects that I think is just really well done, and I plan on supporting it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, we should call this to a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Well, that concludes both cases that involve public hearings. We'll move to new and old business, of which I don't see any on the agenda. So we can move straight to everyone's favorite item on the agenda, which is the motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for your indulgence. We are adjourned.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.